This is Rapid Application Development, COMP1004, Lesson 10.9, Part 3, right? So we're talking about selecting records from a list now. There's some quirky stuff here, guys. I would watch quite carefully because there's some sources that will tell you to do it in some way, and some other sources tell you do the same thing in other ways. And by the way, it's okay to use Google. In this particular case, if you want to do some kind of specific effects for your assignment number 4, but be careful because it may not provide you, it may not do what you want it to do, what you think about it. Okay, so sometimes what we want to do is we want to use a list box or a combo box, right, to kind of select values from a database instead of stepping through with the data with the navigator, right? Because the binding navigator is cool if you want to step through with Microsoft's built-in control, but what if you don't want to use that? Right? You kind of want to use a drop-down to do that, which might be better. So how do we do that? So let's go back to our previous example. So we're going to go back here. And by the way, if you look at, I'm just going to close some of these down. If you look at detail form, and you look at the code, again, there's not a lot of code, right, if you look at it, but it does have a couple things. It has the save item click. It does create a couple of additional pieces of code for that. It does validate, make sure it's validated. It actually adds in this end edit and a couple of other pieces of code that are crucial to make this binding navigator thing work. Okay? But if you don't have the binding navigator, and by the way, we're going to do one of these. Folks, binding navigator, delete, right? First, delete it. There it is. It's gone. And if I go back to my code now, right, even though this is still here, it doesn't do anything. Right? Let's save all. Here's my view. What I want to do is I want to get rid of this field now, because this field that's linked it's linking to I want to change my data set, the way it works. And instead of it being a text box, I want it to be a combo box. I can't modify the text box to make it a combo box. Can't do that, right? Actually, in other languages, and if you're doing this kind of connection, if you're using controls, dragging and dropping onto things like for an Android phone or something, you can actually switch the type of box because it uses XML to design or to say this is the type of control that you've got here, and all I got to do is just change my XML. So theoretically, I could do it here too, but the easier way to do it to stop any kind of problems and connection issues is just delete this thing. So we'll delete it. Now we're going to go back to our data source, okay? And instead of ISBN, that's our field that we're changing, right? So here's our data source. Instead of ISBN being a text box like we have here, we're going to change it to a combo box, right? We can also change it to a list box. Let's use the combo. So the actual picture will change, what it's going to look like. So here it is, right? If I drag and drop this thing back on here, it's going to do a couple of things. It's going to give us the field, and there's also this useless label that comes along with it, which we can just delete. We already have the ISBN label. And now I'm going to line it up with everything else, right, to make sure that it looks the same as my field. I don't have any kind of control here yet, right? So I've got to add the control. I got to bind this control that I just dragged and dropped in here. I got to make sure that it works properly. So let's follow the presentation, make sure we don't miss anything. So again, we've just deleted the binding navigator, right? We've added the combo box control, right? And now what we need to do is we need to go into the smart tag, and we do a couple things. Use data bound items, number 1. We're going to change the data source, and we're going to display the member ISBN, right? And make sure that the selected value is none. These are all the changes we need to make to that one field, right? So again, let's go through it. I got to use data bound items, right? I'm going to choose my source, books binding source. I'm going to display the member ISBN. I'm going to make sure this stays as none. So I've done all that work. Click away. So that's the first thing. We're not done yet. Next step. There seems to be, I'll just put it like this to you guys, right? The standard way of doing this, if I was to drag and drop it, some examples say this is enough, in some books. But unfortunately, it doesn't work properly for C# and VB and other languages unless you make this modification, right? You've got to go to the data bindings section of your properties bar for this particular control and modify the tag value so it says books binding source, right? And take away the text value. If you don't do that, those kinds of things, you'll have issues. So let's do that. And I'll show you what I'm talking about in a second. You're like, what is he talking about? Here's what I'm talking about. Here's your data binding section of this control. See how this control is highlighted? Here's my data binding sections. I got to click down here. And as I go through here, if you notice my text file here is showing this information, right? I definitely want to wipe this away, make it none. And in my tag, I want to change this to books binding source and pull down ISBN. If I don't do this, it won't work properly. Okay? Selected item, if you notice, is none, right? And the data, what we say is that's how it's got to look. None selected item, none for selected value, only the tag and not the text. Okay? And now if we run the application, here it is, right? And if you notice, my ISBN I'm pulling down, I can do everything that I normally can do with my ISBN, right, with my combo box. I actually pull it down whatever I want. So here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I know that's my Republic of Thieves, and it'll pull it up, right? So I can use my combo box to select a different item in my database through the ISBN as a main field. So I can create different searches. I can say search by or filter by ISBN. I can create filter by the title of the work, and so on, right? If I was actually going to type in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? If I knew that that was the ISBN number, right? That doesn't really help me because it doesn't do any kind of searching. See, 1, 2, 3, 4. If I press enter, there's nothing that does that. I have to program that, right, with code, right? If I was actually typing it in here and I wanted this to change as I do this, that's a different piece of behavior that I want to code in here, right? Now, if you notice, it takes me right there to the nearest one, right? But let's say if I select this one and I put 1, 2, 3, 4 again, 5, 4, 5, and I know what it is, and I pull it down, it's actually going to take me right there. It's going to show me. But what I wanted to do is not this, but actually to do the changes, and I have to program that in myself. Okay? So here it is, Republic of Thieves. So really, that's what we've done. We've kind of selected these fields, right? We've already kind of done this. We've added the data source, and we've modified everything to make sure that things are working as we want them to. Let's say, for example, we don't want all the fields from our database table. Like our database includes a lot of different fields, but our connection, our data source, we don't want it to hold everything. All we want in our data source is ISBN, title, and author. We don't want the others to appear at all. We can deselect them when we're creating our data source here as well. So you can be very specific in terms of what fields, even though you might have a bigger file, right, of data, but you don't want all the fields. You only want a certain types of fields. This is where you do that. The other thing is, if I want to sort my data in a list, there's different ways to do that, right? But you can't use, when you have a data-bound control, you cannot sort it right through the control itself. Even if you try to use the sorted value in the data-bound control, it won't work, right? You need to do this through your SQL, a SQL select statement. Yes. You want to say your next question? Yeah. So how do I do that? So again, I want to click up. First thing is, I've got to get my, if I look at my XSD file and double click it, here's my schema, right? And as an example, I got to click on fill get data. And under my command text, right, I'm going to click the ellipses, which is going to bring up my query builder, right? Under my query builder, I can do a bunch of stuff here. I can create a custom select statement, custom query, if I want to. I can also change the sort type, as an example, So my sort type, I want to make it ascending, right? And it actually adds this in, order by ISBN, right? So now my ISBN list will be in ascending order, so numerically, even if my database is not. And press OK. Yes. Now I've done this, and now when I run my code, right, it'll definitely order things in order. And if you notice, 8423-22183 comes after my 12345 Republic of Thieves, even though, from a data record perspective, it's the last record in the database, right? So I can sort my values that way. There's Republic of Thieves. All right. We also talked about choosing control types, right? So I've already changed I can change from a text box to a label or to a list box or whatever I decide to use, right? So when I drag and drop these from our data source, and this is the best way to do it, guys. You can do it the other way too. Once you have your data source, if you want to create your data-bound control and do it backwards, you can. But unfortunately, what it doesn't do is, if you do it that way, it doesn't put all the required components in your component tray. So my recommendation is you go to your data source and you drag and drop the, your fields where you want them, and then if you need to take away your data, your binding navigator, do so. Okay, that's the better way to do it, and do what we just did, right? An example of this would be this. Let's say instead of using a database that has more than, you're selecting a particular field in the database, and we're going to go through assignment number 4 in the next section after we save this one. I want to talk about strategies about how you do this with assignment number 4, because after this is the last day we're talking about databasing. We're not going to talk about it again. We're going to talk about saving and loading next week, right, and working with data files. But we're not really talking about databasing anymore. And the questions are going to come up and say, well, how do I do what you're asking me to do, Tom? Right? So let's talk about strategies around that. So we're not going to do our hands-on programming just from a time perspective. We have 12 o'clock. And I want to really talk about your, I'll leave this to you for today, but I really want to talk about your assignment number 4 and how it works with databasing. So let's just stop here, and we'll go to assignment number 4.